For 40 years, the Gallup poll has asked Americans about what they have trust in. The survey asks about the same 14 institutions. That list includes banks, big tech, Congress, the Supreme Court, newspapers, and churches. In 2004, a record number of Americans, 43%, expressed confidence in the country's institutions. By last year, that number was just 27%. The lowest on record. The most trusted were small businesses, the military, and the police. The least trusted were newspapers, the criminal justice system, big business, television news, and Congress. I'm Trey Kay, and from West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, you're listening to Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us. As part of a new series on trust, we're partnering on some live events that consider this erosion of trust. We recently kicked off the series at West Virginia University in Morgantown with two veteran journalists to talk about the lack of trust in the media. Thank you, Misha. So I launched Us and Them back in 2015 to focus on conversations that highlight the things that divide Americans. We've seen this play out in large and small ways, like families who stop talking to each other because of politics, with millions of people who do not trust the science behind vaccinations or who do not trust the outcome of elections. Now, we've heard from many people who say that the erosion in public trust in America is an existential threat to our democratic republic. We believe that this is the issue of our times, we on the Us and Them team. So after a lot of discussion with my friend and colleague, Emily Corio from WVU's Reed College of Media, we decided to focus this very first Us and Them event on the erosion of trust in the information that we receive from our nation's professional news organizations. And to talk with us tonight, I am so pleased to welcome to the Mountain State two journalists with reputations for producing work at the most high level. So first, I'd like to introduce my friend Rainey Aronson-Roth. She is editor-in-chief and executive producer of Frontline, PBS's flagship investigative journalism series. She is a leading voice on the future of journalism. And under her leadership, Frontline has won every major award in broadcast journalism. Rainey, it's so great to have you here.
Thanks, great to be here.
And somebody else who I think is a new friend, June Cross, is Columbia University's Fred W. Friendly Professor of Media and Society, and she's the director of the documentary journalism program. Her work has been awarded with the highest honors in broadcast journalism, and her career has highlighted stories of the dispossessed and the intersection of race, politics, and public health. She joined the Columbia Journalism School in 2001, and she is now a tenured faculty member. June, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, I want you to consider the things that we talk about tonight that you're curious about. Because after Rainey and I and June talk for about, 45 minutes, we'd love for you to ask some questions. So Rainey, trust in news is something that you've been concerned about for a long time. And back in the mid-2000s, you made a documentary. I'd just like to play the opening intro of that documentary, and then I'd like to ask you some questions on the other end.
Tonight on Frontline.
The job of a reporter is to be the curmudgeon who raises questions that nobody else wants to raise. That's what the best reporters try to do.
Once upon a time, they were thought of as heroes. But today, the entire news industry is in crisis.
The public has a terrific disdain for the press.
We have a press that is at war with an administration
while our country is at war against merciless enemies.
For 30 or more years, there had been an assumption about the government and the press, and suddenly in the last couple of years, that's changed.
In a 4-part special series, Frontline reporter Lowell Bergman looks at the challenges facing journalists today.
Would you go to jail to protect your sources?
Absolutely.
The war between the White House and the press.
The President of the United States saying, if you publish this story, you will have blood on your hands.
The explosion of new and emerging media.
Ever feel like the 6 o'clock news just ain't cutting it for you?
You don't see anybody between 20 and 30 getting their news from the evening news. You see them getting it online.
And the economic realities of today's news business.
You have to make more every year to keep the shareholders happy.
How did we get here?
We're judging journalism by the same standards that we apply to entertainment. That may be one of the greatest tragedies in the history of American journalism.
And what is at stake?
There's a dire need for institutions that tell the truth, that pursue the truth, and that chase it at all costs.
Tonight, part 1 of News War, a Frontline special series.
So, Rainey, that was about 15 years ago.
That was actually 18 years ago.
Is it really that long?
Yeah, it's really that long ago. Unbelievably true. He was my associate producer. Just to have a transparent moment here, Trey worked on that series with me out of New York.
So much of that, in so many ways, some of the things that you ID right there at the beginning seem like they're the same problems today. What would you say is different now?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, 2 really big things happened in the last 18 years. You all know it. It's the social platforms. It's the complete disruption of our business models. And it is, unfortunately, the hollowing out of local journalism. And I have looked at this in our reporting, but also on a night commission where we looked at trust in the media. One of the things that we identified is that local journalism being hollowed out sort of broke apart trust, right? So, I don't know how the trust was really between places like, the national news organizations and local communities as much as there was between local communities and their local journalism outlet. And I think that when we saw that diminishment and the business model shifted so dramatically, we see this fissure in trust. It's now fundamental and there. So national news organizations like Frontline, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, there isn't that same connective tissue. You might appreciate it, but you don't have that feeling that, that we care about your actual community, which is something that a lot of us are addressing now at the national level.
And are you seeing that do you see a rural, urban
Absolutely.
switch that? I mean, I say that because here in West Virginia, it seems like our reporting infrastructure has just kind of gone away.
Well, I mean, I was surprised speaking to students today, and June and I were just talking about this, that the local college paper has a bigger distribution than the local news organization here. And so that strikes me too, that, this is a crisis. So local journalism being hollowed out means that in your communities, our communities, corruption doesn't just show its face, right? So if you don't have journalists on the ground asking questions and even being in the room enough to observe and be aware of what's happening, then we don't know what's happening. This is why the value add as journalists, you're wondering, how are we valuable to my life? This is something that we think a lot about that at Frontline, and now we actually support local news organizations. We didn't know what else to do but to say we have to be part of a solution here. It's a small part, but now we support local newsrooms because that's how much we believe that voices at the local level have to be heard. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in West Virginia. I really believe it.
And can we put this one little graphic up here? This is a Gallup poll. And if we look, this is showing the institutions in America that Americans have faith in. Now, you look at the top, it's small businesses. We can see
small businesses. That's interesting. Yeah.
Right. And way at the bottom, under the presidency, is newspapers, and down below that, what is it?
Television news.
Television news is what I can't. It's under big businesses and just above Congress. June, what do you think about that? I mean, I think when you started,
I probably agree with it.
Yeah, well, say more.
I mean, I go to my small businesses in my community most often. I know them. I don't know that I trust anything that I hear out of Congress anymore. And I think for a lot of people, journalists, the way we're portrayed on these streaming channels like Netflix, I end up screaming at the TV.
Well, how are they portrayed?
Because they portray what journalists who might work for a what we used to call a tabloid, but the ones who have no sense of ethics, the ones who will sleep with their sources and then rat them out, they never portray what we actually do.
So, Rainey, are we responsible for Americans' growing distrust in institutions?
What I think is, and I've thought this for years now, that journalists and editors like myself, so people in positions of power like bosses, need to lean into building trust. Like we call it at Frontline, we call it turning around the rock. You're always taking an idea and you're looking at it from different angles. You're always reporting against your assumptions. We teach this like almost Socratically at Frontline. But the other thing that I've done at Frontline, which I think is a really great, very important effort, and I want other news organizations to do this too, is we publish the underlying materials of interviews. So if I was to interview you and you're at the university and I'm asking you some tough questions, budget cuts, whatever I want to ask you about, I would then make a piece. We put it in the Frontline documentary, but then I publish the whole conversation and I publish the video too.
Is that something you started?
Well, we had transcripts. So we always had the text transcripts. So the idea that we would have our transcripts in the public, for me as a producer, was incredible. So I need to tell you this because this is how I built trust in the field. I covered the culture wars as a producer for Frontline. And what I did was I was able to say to you that I'm going to interview you, but Frontline's going to publish our whole conversation in text, right? Because this is really pre-streaming video. And I got people to sit down with me. And that was the first time I understood the lack of trust was real. They didn't want to be edited. They were nervous what I was going to do with the conversation. And so if we could then say, we're going to publish that, they had such an ease. Yeah, I mean, we edit it. And I need to be careful here because we do edit them for libel. We edit for fact-based, we don't want somebody lying in an interview, right? So when it is actually an act of publishing, when you publish anything. The other thing we do now is we publish the video. And you would be amazed at how this means that Republicans, Democrats, people in the middle, people still sit down with Frontline for a reason. Because there is trust, but because we're like leaning in to say, hey, we're going to give you your best shot. We're going to be fair to you. We're humans, so we're not always fair, but we try. And we're going to publish your actual conversation with me. So you could argue with me if I got you wrong, if I got it wrong.
Have you seen Frontline's audience grow since you've had this transparency project?
Well, I mean, we have a huge audience on YouTube. So if any of the students are in the room, they don't even watch PBS probably necessarily, but you're watching us on YouTube. And these unedited or these longer interviews, the transparency interviews, millions of people watch them. It's just unusual. I mean, people go in and they'll watch the whole conversation with our producer.
Well, I guess I wanted to know, like, it seemed that before, like most journalists and editors, they operated under the assumption that, if you do good work, then it'll all just kind of fall in place. And I'm just wondering, was there a moment with regard to Frontline where you kind of said, you know what, that's not enough?
Yeah, it was reporting on Putin. And I decided it was called Putin's Revenge. And it was a moment with our managing editor where I just said to him, I think if we want to build trust, this is more of a geopolitical idea as opposed to just American trust in the media. Why don't we take the interviews and show what we did? And why don't we actually show people our edits? That's a radical move as an editor. Usually editors hold back this kind of information for a reason. You don't need to see the secret sauce of what we do. But what we found is people were so appreciative of us just showing the process that people just basically love this project, love seeing the underlying materials. And it's a huge amount of work for us at Frontline.
So you mentioned something, Rainey. You were talking about June. I'd like to play that clip and then we'll talk about it on the other end.
as a tenured professor at Columbia University, turning out all of these filmmakers, I've always wanted to sit in on one of your classes to find out, what do you tell them about the work?
It's a 15-week class. It actually takes a whole year. It's 13 months.
But about the work that they want to do and need to do in society, of changing the way we live, of fixing things that are broken.
Well, journalists can't really fix things that are broken. We can raise awareness, we can educate and inform. I really work on them to not try to fix things that are broken, because usually you end up with not interesting documentaries if you're not willing to go on a journey of discovery and find something that may be unpleasant along the way.
But to expose, to highlight.
Yes, we expose, we comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable is the motto of the journalism school. And so, we really do work from, the motto, we train students to go out and report from the grassroots.
So does low public trust in the news affect how you work with students?
No, I just try to teach them to treat others the way they would want to be treated. I mean, that's a really, I had a situation this week where a student who was reporting on a group of the asylum seekers who've flooded into New York. And there's a lot of single men who are living in a shelter in Brooklyn. He'd done a story. This is the first story he ever wrote. He actually got it published because the police had staged a raid on the shelter and taken all of the mopeds, roughed up some of the men who were living in the shelter. They were expelled from the shelter. And if their moped was unregistered, and actually even if it was registered, they were still expelled from the shelter. So now there's all these men living on a corner with no way to make a living because their mopeds were seized. The student came to me and said one of the advocates asked him to get the advocate in touch with the men at the shelter. And I said, no. You can give the men at the shelter the number of the advocate, and if they want to call him, they can. But you're not to be the intermediary here.
Draw the dots for people who don't get that.
So drawing the dots. It's not our job to fix the situation. I didn't want him to get into the situation where he thought he could do something to help these men. He can reveal what's going on, and by revealing what's going on is the best way to help them, because then people read the story and think...
It's the important part that we need to have.
He's not a social worker. That's what I'm trying.
And he's not an advocate.
And he's not an advocate. Yeah, his job is to reveal what's going on, not become part of the story.
Do you hear certain comments from your students? They come to the Columbia Journalism School and they pay a lot of money to go there, but do they have apprehensions about going out into the field?
Yeah, there's so many reasons to have apprehensions now. The young women are worried about going out and being attacked by the men. The Black students are worried about going out and being attacked by the police. One of the things we used to say was you had to interview the police and accept whatever the authority said. Well, if you accept whatever the authority said, one of the things we now know, because everybody has a cell phone, is that the police have been doing a lot of the things that are contrary to serving the public and keeping them safe. Some of my Black students get upset with me. They're like, why can't we be advocates? I think we do a better job when we can reveal the corruption, like that young woman who took the picture of George Floyd, right? She could have tried to interfere, but she had the moral courage to stand there and hold that camera for 9 minutes and 15 seconds. And that did so much more than her getting involved in that situation.
I just want to note that it is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Week here at West Virginia University. And I'm wondering, how does a person's perspective on diversity and racial issues tend to affect the news and information that they trust?
I was having a conversation with the limousine driver on the way down here from Pittsburgh today. And I started talking to him about why I was like, about trust in the media. And I was like, well, what do you think? And he was like, I think it started with the Vietnam War, because that generation was the generation that said, don't trust anybody over 30. Then we discovered that the government was lying to us about the whole reason for being in Vietnam. Then we found out that they were lying to us about the casualty reports. Then we found out that the veterans who came back were being sprayed with napalm and nobody gave a flying F whether or not they lived or died. I mean, you could start pulling this thread from long ago, but I thought that was very astute on his part.
I would like to be a student in your class because I do actually want to just say one of the big things that I've seen a great shift in journalism is that for women and for people of color, there are a lot more of us in the room, and there are a lot more bosses in the room that look more like us, right? Different, obviously, but there is positive change in that way. There's so much more change needs to happen because to your question, Trey, I do think if our newsrooms looked and felt more like our communities, I do think that that's changing and starting to happen, but I think more of that will build trust. I'm like ever an optimist about journalism. And I think a lot of these community-based news organizations, the smaller ones that are just popping up all across America, look and feel like they're communities.
That if we see news reporters who look like us, that's an important...
It's not as simple as that. It's actually just having diversity at the table. People have different perspectives. And I would say partisan diversity too. So that there's a conversation that's robust around the editorial table, robust in the field, and robust in what you see in your films and editorial pages. This is I just have a strong opinion about this part.
But there's the notion of objectivity.
There's no such thing as objectivity. Period. End of sentence.
So, but I guess the idea is, and I'd like to hear you elaborate on this, but that there is a truth that we can uncover. Is there a truth, or are there many truths?
There is such a thing as a verifiable fact. You can be fair, but you cannot be objective. There's a difference. That's where I make the distinction.
I do believe in something really important, that is that there is such a thing that is called a skilled editor and journalist who has the skills. I happen to know that the students here are being taught that because I was interrogating one of the professors about what's being taught here. And so I do believe that you can learn how to be a reporter. You can learn how to be fair. You can learn about actually vetting facts, and you can work with editors who ask you tough questions. And I support fact-based journalism. I do not believe there are multiple truths. I believe there are multiple lived experiences, so you could have a variety of opinions. But I don't believe in this idea that anything could be true. A fact is maybe true. I really do believe that if you apply editorial standards and practices to your work, that what comes out the other end is generally fair, fact-based, and also includes usually accountability journalism at the heart of it. It's almost like science, It's like there's a method to how we might study something or understand something. And I believe that if you practice journalism in that way, you can actually come out with something that is valid, that people will resonate with, regardless of what your partisan beliefs are.
It just seems to me, in the conversations that I have between the left and the right, there's this political factor that goes into the middle of that, and it's like, well, we know what June Cross is. She's a liberal, and I'm using you as an example, and that basically she has a bias, and we can't trust her. Do you still feel that the model that you just laid out there, that still it can go through the editorial process, and we can trust that what comes out is fair?
Yes, I do. And I believe that if we don't believe that, then we should go into another field. I am so serious about this. And I do think there's a lot of yelling right now. And I have a couple of teenagers, so I know what it feels like to be in a battle, okay? And I really don't think we need to act like teenagers. I think we can have conversations, which is what you try to do on your podcast. There's something at this sort of the base level of America right now that's not working for a lot of people. And so everybody could be angry and have a food fight over journalists and this and that. But I really think at the end of the day, we just have to have more humanity in the room. And I'll rant a little bit longer. I also believe that a lot of journalism that's practiced today is way too easy. It's quick, it's a quick hit, it hurts the story itself usually, and it's superficial. And so that's what I was talking about students today about. Do deep work. That will resonate, that will have real authentic change. And maybe, do some good. Not that we're supposed to do good, but we're supposed to reveal things.
Now, I'm looking in this room here. I'm seeing there's some students here, et cetera. Recently, we've looked at a Pew study that basically says, and I'm paraphrasing this, that it's a high percentage of young people under 30 that trust basically information that they get via social media, et cetera, about as much as they do mainstream news organizations.
Right. Those are my kids. And that can you imagine that? So that's our dinner table. That is our dinner table.
But the people who are publishing the stuff on TikTok, where are they getting their news from? The mainstream news organizations.
I want to tell you a story. I have two kids. One's 14, one's 17. One is a unmitigated jock. My daughter, not so much at all. They're in different social media feeds. They get different news and information. They actually are being targeted differently on their social media channels. My son tends to be more middle of the line and conservative. My daughter is more progressive. What they are targeted with are essentially mis and disinformation on both sides. As a parent, I'm watching what they're watching with them because I take that time with them. I know that sounds sanctimonious, but it's my only way of understanding why they're forming these really strong points of view so young. Like, why do you believe that? And then I watch it and they're so persuasive. These little videos on Instagram, on TikTok, it's quite something.
I'm just curious, like I'm thinking with my son at a certain point, it was, you seem like the old geezer. You are an award-winning journalist. Your husband is an award-winning journalist. And when you are kind of checking what it is that they're watching on TV, is it kind of meh, Peabody Award, meh, Murrow Award, yeah.
Yeah, like I'm just a mom to them. I'm just their mother. Thank God. I'm just their mother. I love them. They love me. But I do think because of the work that I do, that I am especially engaged with them, talking about what I believe all families should be doing right now, which is really like the media literacy piece sounds boring, but it's everything. So if you think about your kids or your nephew or your niece or whoever it is in your life who's younger, they're forming their opinions right now. They're forming their worldview. So if they are being fed propaganda or they're being targeted, you need to understand what that is and help them understand the difference between that and what they might read in a newspaper or see in a newscast. Like they need to know that difference. So we kind of talk about that more than you would in a regular family that the parents aren't journalists.
Hey, I'm Trey Kay, and you're listening to an Us and Them live event on diminishing trust in the news media, held recently at West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia. We'll have a Q&A after a break. This program is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council and the CRC Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
This is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. I'm Trey Kay, and now we'll return to the question and answer segment of a public event we held recently at West Virginia University. Our topic, diminishing trust in the news media and journalism. Our guests, Rainey Aronson Roth. She's editor-in-chief and executive producer of Frontline, PBS's flagship investigative journalism series. And June Cross. the Fred W. Friendly Professor of Media and Society at the Columbia Journalism School.
Thank you. My trust in West Virginia media was diminished after the West Virginia Broadcasters Association and West Virginia media, including public broadcasting, changed the debate rules to exclude third-party candidates. How do we restore our faith that we can return to a structure where outside voices and not just the two corporate parties have a seat at the table? This would be honoring diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Well, when they do these debates, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on with whoever is going to broadcast the thing. And the candidates who are pulling in the most money get to be the ones who are on. I don't know, other than having more debates on public media, or I don't know how to give more third-party people a voice in those debates. I agree with you that there should be more. It is one of those sort of gummed up, how do you untie this Gordian knot? I wouldn't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. Give your third-party candidate more money so they can get up there.
Hi, panel. I don't know what question is going to come out of this, but I just noticed a lot of circular thinking, kind of a paradox, right? So on the one hand, June, you referred to the white men making decisions about what we were going to cover. And so there's something to be said that we've splintered and that we're getting news from TikTok instead of just the CBS Nightly News, that it's not just Walter Cronkite, it's a variety of voices that are doing this online. But at the same time, you both also mentioned that part of this splintering and this distrust resulted as we've democratized
the media ecosystem, and as that's happened,
the fact
more
that
and more
it has
people
splintered, and so I'm wondering, is part of restoring faith in the media actually restoring some sense of gatekeepers?
It's like talking about putting the cow back in the barn after the doors open. I mean, I agree with you that the democratization is a part of the problem. And it's probably also part of the solution, but we're not there yet. I think we're just haven't quite hit that crisis point that's going to make things switch. I don't like the idea of gatekeepers, but I do believe in standards. But not necessarily gatekeepers. So, but there's got to be a gatekeeper. I don't know. Yeah, it is a circular argument. You can solve that one.
Yeah, you can solve that. No, I'm joking. I actually do think that would be, I talked to the students about this earlier. I think respect for the editorial process and the editors at the heart of asking tough questions is probably more important than calling them gatekeepers. I think just calling us editors, we're skilled people. We know how to ask tough questions. We know how to look at things and know usually when something's fake or wrong. So we're trained, right? And I think that would be wonderful. And I think our field doesn't really train or help editors know that this is like a righteous field. You know, we focus a lot on reporters, we focus on makers, very important, but the actual process of, you know, making sure something is true, making sure something is fair, you know, that's not something we're taught in journalism school usually as a calling. And those of us who have found it, like, we're very lucky because it's very gratifying work, but that pathway is not usually talked about.
You guys hear me okay? Okay. So I'm 18. Like, journalism has been so skewed for my whole life. The first president I can remember is Obama, right? And I just remember all my recollection of him is, oh, he's sharp. That's a nice guy. Like, he can talk. That's it. So my political consciousness kind of was there during the Trump presidency. And we know that since then, media has been so biased, right? So I just want to ask, like, I don't know what sort of research you guys have done on the concept, but have you noticed any, like, trends of apathy or just like ignorance among teenagers in like my generation towards politics and like current events because, you know, we just don't care what the media has to say because it's been so bad?
I actually did a documentary for Frontline called Whose Vote Counts, And one of the pieces of information that began it was how the social media platforms, particularly Facebook and Twitter, were weaponized to get people to be apathetic by spreading misinformation and disinformation. And the group that was least likely to vote in the 2016 election were single women with children. The group after them that were least likely to vote were young people below 30. And both of them had spent a lot of time on social media. So that's where what Rainey was talking about, media literacy, becomes so important in questioning, this is what I agree with, but does that make it true? Those are two different questions.
I want to talk to you about the role and impact of technology and journalism. Should journalists be rushing towards new technologies, new apps to, the medium is the message to a certain extent? And what about also the impact of AI? Rainey, you said that, journalists are trained to be able to distinguish, reality from fake. What if we are soon, or if not already, in that time where we genuinely cannot tell what is true and what is not?
Thank you for asking that. I actually thought that would be one of the first questions, and we're thinking a lot about that at Frontline because we work in a visual medium. So a lot of what we do is, could be manipulated, and we have found manipulation through the last number of years increasing in the citizen journalism. So the journalism that you might get from the ground, so somebody's cell phone that they're shooting. So a Frontline rule is that we never just use found materials. Like if you shot something at a rally, that can now be so easily manipulated that we don't consider that a source. So we have to have another source, and usually we go for 3 of the same incident from 3 different sources that aren't related because we're so worried about manipulation, because we have experienced manipulation. We found manipulation well before AI became like a thing in the last, number of years. And so on the AI issue, I actually am a fellow at MIT's Media Lab because I feel like as an editor, I need to understand this really well. So I'm studying this right now and what impact this is going to have on journalism. I have a simple and optimistic answer. You're getting to know me a little. One of the things I think about AI is it's so important for journalists to just go do journalism, to not even do it remotely at all. Like actually go into the field and do boots on the ground journalism. It's better anyway, right? And it means that we can verify what you have. It also means that you're working with trained reporters and journalists more. So you're not working with people that you don't know. You're training them, you're talking to them, you're talking about your editorial standards. And that takes a lot of work, and takes obviously the economics of it have to work out. So maybe less is more, but I think that's the counter to AI right now. And I know that sounds really retro, but it's actually completely modern because we're now going back to what we did, but we need to do more of that.
I actually use AI sometimes. I tell my students to write their story using ChatGPT, and then compare it to what they actually know about the story and find out where the discrepancies are, because AI hasn't yet reached the point where it can tell the difference between fact and fiction, and sometimes it just makes stuff up, and it adds, and the writing is sort of, I can tell AI is writing a mile away. I have a relative who's really into QAnon, and one day she sent me this video of tanks going down the street, and she's like, the federal government is coming, they're rolling tanks down the streets, and I'm looking at this, and I actually spend a half hour trying to figure out where's the kernel of truth here. And I discovered that I finally found a local news station, thank you, in Milwaukee, that the National Guard was moving their tanks from point A to point B. These things can be twisted so easily. We have a whole division at the J School that would help you help verify things that are going on, but it's called visual forensics. And I recommend it to all of you.
So you've talked about this, and it's kind of been threaded through your discussion. And one of them has been people being represented, being seen, worrying about food, shelter, clothing, the things that they deal with on a daily life. That the trust is not just with media, but trust of all. That media is not to actually solve the problem, but to report on the problem. My question is, with all those factors known, when do the individuals that are beholden to media have a love for media and actually care about the reputation of media begin to step in and say, for the integrity of my profession, I need to show some authenticity and fix how we as a profession are seen, not the problems of the world per se, but how we conduct ourselves in this profession.
Do you mean our audiences or?
No, I mean the individuals who are actually reporting out, your colleague.
Oh.
When does it become a responsibility of the profession? And I know you can't fix
think it
all
already
professions.
is, and you're speaking to two people who want to uphold that banner. I mean, what I find with my students who graduate, and this is especially true of those who go into local TV news, which is still making lots of money and not losing any people. Local news is actually really strong. They have to do 6 stories a day. How can you report 6 stories a day? I don't know how to change that paradigm. And I think that's what needs to change. There is a movement now to give TV reporters more time to get to know the people in their community. They have a name for it. I forgot what it's. It's like development days or something where they get a day off from their regular 6-story-a-day regime to like spend some time in the community and develop sources in the beat and do that beat reporting thing. But it's difficult because we're, I don't know. The pie is the pie, and there's a perception that it's a zero-sum game.
One thing that I want to ask you, Rainey, you talked before about Frontline championing local news reporting, and I'd like to get a little more information about how it is that you're doing that at Frontline. And also, I'm curious if you got West Virginia in your sights, because I think that we have a problem with that here, especially in the southern coalfield part of the state where we just lost a newspaper in McDowell County. I don't know if you read that story, Rainey, but I mean, like people like with their own savings trying to keep that thing alive. I'm sure you're probably seeing other examples of rural parts of America that are having that as a problem, but how are you helping that?
So we have funding right now that funds 5 newsrooms every year, and this really came out of the work I did on the Knight Commission. I was starting to feel, we were studying all this, and I think to your question too, to some degree, we all have to be part of this solution, right? So if you see like newsrooms are falling apart and you're a big national news organization with resources, it just didn't seem fair or equitable that we weren't supporting, at least with what we could do, local newsrooms. So we support 5 newsrooms. We have not supported one in West Virginia, and we should, and I'm happy to be here. And what we do is we do a call. It's actually open right now, so you'll put this in your podcast maybe, where we put a call out for newsrooms that want to be supported by Frontline. And we support them editorially, financially. And the other thing we do is we oftentimes will make films out of the work that they're doing. So, every story is local, if you think about it, right? Every story has a once upon a time, and every story has roots to it. And so we try to make big films out of local stories. And they do wonderfully well for our audience, but more importantly, they amplify the work of local journalists. And the local journalists are in the films. You see them, you hear from them. And that's been one of our most powerful ways to help.
So I just want to preface my question with, I am a journalism professor. I teach ethics and history. We definitely should be responsible and authentic and more caring. But there's also a well-documented sociological phenomenon like hostile media perception or confirmation bias, where people will only trust what they agree with to begin with. And there's a great quote from a scholar who says, democracy needs an unlovable press. That if people did trust the press, then maybe journalists aren't doing their job in holding the powerful accountable. So I guess my question is, how much do we actually kind of chase this trust, and how much do we just kind of stick to the principles of journalism and kind of do what we've always tried to do and be ethical, caring people, and not kind of chase this trust because it is so tied to the business model?
Oh, that is interesting. I didn't expect you to go there with the business model at the very end. I was like, oh, I knew how to answer that until the very last bit. But I would say that everything that you say is true. So I would say that they're not mutually exclusive. Okay. And I know you're a professor, so you're going to beat me at this, but I do think that if you're practicing like very skilled, editorially responsible, fact-based journalism that is also caring and respectful, and you try to build trust by actually just being respectful of the person you're reporting on and not misrepresenting what they believe or say, and you try to understand that your perspective, your partisan beliefs, is as hard as it is, you need to put them on the table and leave space for other opinions and thoughts, then I think we're going to build trust by virtue of our work. And I get despair. At times I feel despair, and then I always just come back to the work. I come back to doing the work. And that's when I start to feel inspired again. It's just in our work we can find that.
I'm sorry, can I just add that really quickly? I think one of the things that I try to advocate is reframing some of the stories we do. Especially in politics, there's a tendency towards the horse race. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? Who's going to win? I don't care about who's going to win. I care how they stand on the issues. I care what those issues are going to mean for people like you. I think the more that we can begin to inculcate that into the reporters that are going out there, the better off we'll be. I just feel like we need, as a profession, to reframe. I don't have a solution for how to do this. I think there are individual pockets of places where people are working on it. We're like pebbles in a pond, and got to believe that sooner or later the ripples will make it to the bank.
This may be a very old question, and maybe I just missed the answer, but you talk about media literacy. And is there any large-scale media literacy programs going on? If there isn't, what would a large-scale media literacy program look like?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer, so I'll just I never say what I don't know, but I do know that a lot of the conversations that are happening about what should be taught in the schools is adjacent to this conversation, and that the unmitigated experience that our kids have needs to be approached with media literacy in the schools, and kids need to be taught about this. And I've lived this experience, so.
I think it's an existential threat. When I talk to people throughout West Virginia and other places that I live, and I say, do you have a problem that there is a diminished trust in the news media? And I hear kind of one of two answers. One is, yeah, it's diminished trust, but it's the other side's fault. It's never going to change, and so I'm just going to kind of just sit back and just complain about it, really. Or there is a news media and it's this big giant of an operation and it's bigger than me and I don't have any input into it. Or, yeah, I see that there's distrust, but and it's a bit of a shoulder shrug. I think that we got to do better. And maybe I'm jumping into the advocacy zone here a little bit, but I'm wondering, and I'm coming back to you, June, is this maybe something that Rainey talks about? Okay, yeah, we need to kind of work with children when they're younger and kind of get them to know and understand what the news and information is.
To be fair, adults don't do very well.
That's what I'm getting at, June. But can we do that with people my age who don't seem to be getting it?
We're not going to solve this here today. I think all of us need to be more skeptical about what we're looking at. I'm a professional at this, and there are times when I just have to go down the rabbit hole and try to figure out, where did this come from? What is going on?
So this, I think, might be my last question. One of the things that many in our field are talking about is solutions journalism, where we focus on solutions to problems rather than just reporting about the problems. Could emphasis on reporting like that be something that could reestablish trust in the news media?
We had a conversation about this in my class this week. Yes, I do think so, as long as we're not doing rah-rah journalism. Solutions don't always work. We need to question what's working and point out what's not working and look at who's funding these solutions and, who's got the vested interest in making sure that they work. We have to be journalists in reporting out the solution. It's not, you don't have to be in an ivory tower. You can go to your local public library and ask the librarian. You do have to have the initiative to do that. And a lot of us are too busy working 2 jobs, whatever, trying to pay the bills. But I think it's possible. It's not that we need to work harder. Probably we both need to work harder on spreading that psalm.
I just wanted to hear your take on solutions journalism.
Oh, so I think the discipline of solutions journalism is a really interesting one. I've thought a lot about it. I've read a lot about it. I know the people who started it. I think it's really righteous. And I agree with June and I believe that the people who practice solutions journalism well do the kind of journalism that June's talking about, which is to be critical, skeptical, honest, and to, question obviously the funding behind the solutions. My perspective just at Frontline, if I could just say, is I think solutions could be part of a story. Because I do believe you need to understand systemic issues. I believe in accountability journalism. I believe in that power of holding those in power to account. I believe corruption needs to be exposed. And then solutions could be part of that if there is one. So I believe there's a power in exposing corruption. And so I think solutions is part of that. Not like only solutions for Frontline, but I respect the field.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is about all the time that we have for tonight. I would like you to join me in thanking Rainey Aronson Roth from PBS Frontline and June Cross from the Columbia Journalism School. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Lori Stern, Mitch Hanley, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to Julie Blackwood from Friends of West Virginia Public Broadcasting, Erica Lindsay and Shannon Cunningham from the West Virginia University Reed College of Media, Aaron Shackelford, who coordinated the recording of this event, and special thanks to journalism professor Emily Corio for all her help in putting this event together. Michael Lipton, Tristan Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, and the CRC Foundation.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.